It is a spectacular, almost summer day in the month of June 2002 on Upper Cornelia Street in Plattsburgh, in front of Bootleggers in the Comfort Inn with proprietor Jim Murray, almost a lifelong friend. How are you, Jim?
Good, Gordy. How you been?
It's just wonderful to be here. At my age, it's wonderful to be anywhere. Why are we here on this beautiful day? Where else would you rather be? The water's too cold to swim. Actually, this is one of the few times we have a little prepared introduction because I want to make sure it's clear to all of our viewers around the North Country why we do this kind of thing. I just came from a presentation on crime victim services at the Rotary Club luncheon in Plattsburgh, and a lot of people want to know why you do what you do in life. And I said, well, I'm 65 years old and I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up, so I just try all these different things. And Calvin introduced me to the wonderful world of television in 1997 after I left radio. If you're a regular viewer to this program, which, in case you haven't determined it yet, is called Our Little Corner on Hometown Cable, you know we love to find out about the history of our region, to talk about it, to inform our listeners, and to preserve it, and above all, to generate an interest in the history of our area. Oftentimes that means taking our hometown cable cameras to the home of a historian or a historical site where the events actually occurred. We've been at a number of forts on television locally. We just had one on recently before recording this from Fort Chamblay, Quebec. It was so beautiful for me to watch it with my wife and enjoy all over again the beautiful sunshiny day like this on June 3rd, 2000 that we recorded it. But it also points up to us and hopefully to our viewers that everything we do becomes a part of history. And 20 years from now, future generations are going to know what Gordy Little looked like and what a very young Jim Murray looked like. And where we worked and where we prayed and where we played. Those are Calvin's words. Very clever and poetic, Calvin. But those of us who've been around for a few years can't help but think of the past, even though we don't dwell on it. A lot of our common memories are about local businesses. I find myself all the time going through old Plattsburgh directories to see where the businesses were. And we're doing some research on the history of Michigan's. That may never end. But I think we've traced it back to the year 1925 when a lady named Otis had a stand on the first floor of the Plattsburgh Theater on Marion Street in Plattsburgh, where Era Asadorian's offices are right now. But who knows? After we talk about it, somebody else will come forward with a new story. We want to know when the buildings opened, when they closed. If you're as old as I am, you want to know you want to try to remember where the local drugstore was because it had a soda fountain and that's where you went after school. But that also includes the taverns and the hotels. Times change. And what seems very permanent here on this location on Upper Cornelia Street could be just a distant memory 20, 30, 40 years from now. We have no idea. Back in the old days when railroads were in their prime, and we've done a lot of programs on railroads, almost every community, large or small, had a hotel, at least one hotel. How many of those old hotels are here today? The old hotel in Moira, my hometown, is falling down. It looks horrible. Think about all the controversy around the Hotel Flanagan in Malone that we read about in the papers that people are talking about down there. Imagine what that Flanagan must have looked like in its prime. See, I'm old enough to remember the Cumberland and the Witherell and the Fife and Drum and a few of these wonderful hotels and places we had in Plattsburgh. Think of all the cabins that dotted Route 9 north and south. Before the days of motels, you could rent a cabin. Some of the cabins exist, but they don't look the same today, and they're certainly not used for the same reasons. So that's one of the reasons we came here to Comfort Inn today. Of course, to let you know what's going on in our little corner today, but to show you our little corner of the world when history has a chance to be revisited 15, 20, 30 years from now. Most of our viewers already know that the late Bob Venn, and his name was mentioned at my luncheon numerous times today, did over 500 of these programs with Calvin, who's been recording this stuff since 1983. We've done a few since we started this together in 1997, and here we are in 2002. Now, aren't you glad when you don't have to say one word for the first 10 minutes, Jimmy?
You do very well.
I made it all up. There is some history to this spot. As we stood here and Calvin hit the on button and the red light flashed, Calvin said, how many restaurants were there here before? And I was trying to remember, and you had them down pat. Tell me about the history of this location.
I could take you back a little bit before the restaurants. I know this area here and where Consumer Square is used to be an apple orchard that was run by the Laphams.
Oh, yes.
We purchased the property from Gus Lapham in 1986, but at that time he relayed that history to us. But since we've been here in '88, there have been 3 restaurants, or 2 restaurants since us and 1 prior. Mamma Mia's was the original. It then became Christopher's, which was quite successful for quite a while. We tried an upscale restaurant named Maxwell's, which didn't really do that well. And we've changed to the brew pub concept with bootleggers, and that seems to fit this market niche with all its history.
How did it all start with you with Terry Miron?
In the early 50s, Terry and I were pushed around in the same baby carriage. Our parents.
I guess that's about as far back as we can go. They were really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yep. Montcalm Avenue in Plattsburgh.
Oh my goodness. Part of the Montcalm crew, and you've been fast friends ever since.
Yes.
Well, how did the idea of going into business together come about?
In the mid-'80s, I was teaching at Plattsburgh Middle School and was looking for a change, and we were heading down to New York City to donate blood to a dear friend of mine, Al Zafarakis.
Oh, my.
And I mentioned that to Terry, and he talked about building an economy hotel on the land he owned on Cornelia Street. And I told him I'd let him know within a few days, and the concept was born with Terry, and I joined in probably '86.
I remember very well his very first news conference when he revealed the concept to the world, and I said to myself, gee, I don't know if that could work. But he seemed so utterly sure of himself, and you guys did a lot of research before this project ever got underway.
Yeah, and it was an evolving project, I think. The idea of combining a health club with a hotel was a unique idea. The hotel guests we find are very compatible with health club members. When the hotel's busiest in the summer, the health club slows down, and vice versa. It's unique. We've seen other health clubs in hotels, but nothing quite as extensive as what we have here. It's a very synergistic business.
Oh, Calvin and I, and you too, even though you're just a youngster, are old enough to remember when Route 3 was not much more than a cow path, to use an old phrase. A very narrow 2-lane highway where 2 wide vehicles could barely pass. This was Lapham's apple orchard. They owned a large apple orchard along here, but there wasn't much on Upper Cornelia Street. And the expansion in the city of Plattsburgh outward was supposed to go northbound. And all of a sudden, things happened like the mud flats and a few other things that got into the mix, and the expansion started westbound. And I can remember in the early days of my career on Wiry launching an advertising campaign that said, "Go west." There's a unique phrase, go west. Well, guess what? Look at how far it's gone west. The businesses are now encroaching on my once very rural property way out there in Morrisonville. So, yeah, it's things have changed even since the 80s on Upper Cornelia Street, haven't they?
They sure have. I can remember the construction of the original Pyramid Mall.
As we can, yeah.
To think that it's gone now already. I guess we are living history right now as we speak, and things change rapidly.
Some of the mega stores are now talking about downsizing. How's that for a novel idea?
Yeah.
After we thought the Home Depots and the Lowe's and all the super Walmarts and so on were going to be the wave of the future, guess what? The wave is heading back out again, since I'm discovering that many of these larger corporations are rethinking their concepts, and people are walking in and say, I'm not sure, but I think I'd like to shop at a smaller place. So some of them are downsizing. So yeah, to say that there is a dynamic involved with business around the country is an understatement, to say the least.
You know, Gordy, my wife and I, when we travel, we play a little game. Very interesting, and I guess it goes along with some of your ideas. We ask each other in the general Plattsburgh area what was located on the corner of.
Yep.
And the businesses that you can bring back to memory by doing that. The other day, she asked me what was on the corner of Margaret and Cornelia, where the current government center sits. And I remember a business there very well. Do you?
Which one?
On the corner of Cornelia and Margaret, right where the government center is.
Well, right up from the corner at 38 Margaret Street, where the studios of WEAV Radio, and where I park my car now is where I parked my car then when I started work here on July 4th, 1961, because Weave was there on Court Street. I remember that very well.
A few years prior to that, though, there was a pharmacy called Connor's Pharmacy, I believe, located right on that corner.
Right on that corner.
And that was taken out with a fire. But
boy, that's another story. All the pharmacies, right? All the drugstores, yeah. And major fires, which we can all recall.
Sure.
From the Methodist Church back in the 50s through some of the major blocks that burned down through the years, all big stories. Calvin and I like to do these retrospectives. Sometimes when we can't think of another topic, or somebody stiffed us on an interview, or Gordy was late and the guy decided to go home, he and I will get in the car and drive around and just reminisce and bounce off each other. We did it last Christmas walking around the mall. We intended to interview lots of people. We ended up interviewing each other and had a great time at it. But that is fun. Yeah. My wife and I, that conversation with Kay and I started with, how many bars can you remember
oh,
from the 50s, from the 40s and 50s? And I'm still adding names. I added a dance club last night when Keith Herkelo called me and said, how about the Pavilion south of Plattsburgh? There were 2 dance pavilions. One of them was the second biggest dance floor in all of New York State, with over 6,000 square feet. More than 200 couples could dance at the same time. You imagine what that was like in 1925 during a very, very important segment of our North Country history, talk about bootleggers. So yeah, that's fun to remember, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's fun to go back. And I'm getting along in years now, and I haven't caught you yet, but there's been so many changes in my lifetime, and and they'll continue to happen. I think the only thing that's permanent is change. So they'll continue to happen, and we'll see what the future brings.
You grew up around a family business, a grocery store, right?
Right.
Your whole life was spent
in
watching people come in and picking up their groceries in a little neighborhood grocery store, right?
Neighborhood grocery store on Montcalm Avenue, and the number of businesses that existed in the late 50s and early 60s on Montcalm Avenue was, it far exceeds what's there today. It was really a thoroughfare of that whole French Quarter. Businesses moved out of that little neighborhood setting now, but it's much more residential than it was then.
There were businesses that stayed there for over 100 years, with little grocery stores and meat markets that stayed there for a long, long time.
Yeah.
And the Fourth Ward.
And the Fourth Ward will always be there.
You can't replace the Fourth Ward. That's what it's all about, Jimmy, right?
That's right.
Well, what we want to do is take a little tour of what you are doing and what you plan to do here, and maybe we can open a few eyes before we're through. You think so? Sure
can. I think we've got some good historical items right in the restaurant that people might want to see.
Let's take a look at them. Well, we're where I always wanted to be. This is the bar, Jimmy. Who conceived this idea?
I think the original concept was Terry's. The idea of making your own beer and brew pubs is just becoming in vogue in the early to mid 90s, and Terry ran into something at a convention that triggered his imagination, and it went from there.
He's got an imagination.
He's got a great imagination, a very creative individual.
It's difficult. You have to be born with the quality of being able to dream and then exercise the dream, put it into use. And Terry's got that ability, but so do you. You're not the totally silent partner here, you know. We know who's doing this interview here today.
The dreaming is one thing, it's the execution that's the difficult part. We can all come up with concepts, but making them work is really the hard part, and it's an ongoing part. It doesn't stop.
Oh no, it doesn't stop. That's one of the reasons for us being here today to record this program, to show how people do execute an idea without shooting themselves in the foot. How about that one?
There you go.
So we're here at Bootleggers, and the very name caught on, didn't it? People buzzed about it the minute the name was made public.
Yeah, I think the name is befitting this area. The decorations, in a lot of cases, are area-type things, although a lot of it's period decorations. Decorating this place was a ball, Gordy. We had
You must have had so much fun.
Had a gentleman from Sable Forks named Alex Rada who really did a whole bunch for us. He's from New York City. He went down there and made carload after carload of purchases of dusty old instruments and photos, and they adorn our walls today. We still have more. We're going to refresh some of them, and it was really fun to see what he'd come back with from the city.
It is like a museum in here. You can drink a short beer or a tall beer in here and see an awful lot of our nation's history just in the objects you have around you.
Yep. Our nation's history from that period, the 20s and late 1918 to the early 30s.
You have photographs, you have old crocks, you have musical instruments, maybe part of an old still or two, I'm not sure.
That's what it is.
Yeah,
we also have the Spirit of St. Louis, made by Maynard Joubert from originally from
Maynard made that?
Maynard was a model maker. He did a great job on that. Got photographs, actually counted the number of burnishings in Lindbergh's plane and tried to match that up.
You gotta be kidding.
He's a stickler for accuracy.
It certainly does look real for those of us who've been to the Smithsonian to see the Spirit of St. Louis and hear people still talking about Lindbergh, not only that spectacular and historic flight, but then the kidnapping of his young son.
Right.
And I heard an interview on public radio recently with his granddaughter, and they're still talking about that all these years later, 75 years later.
Sure are. Very courageous man to do that.
That's cool. Plus everything else here. Of course, when you and I were young, and especially when I was young, the word microbrewery had not been invented yet. But boy, there's something else that caught on.
It did, and you know, if you look back at the history of our country, every community had its own brewery. There weren't large regional breweries like there are today, so there were 1-2 breweries in every community, and in a small sense, the country's moving back to that, although the microbrews and brew pubs don't compete with the big guys, but it's a little bit of history coming back.
And local people still tend to support the little microbrewery like you have here. Believe me, I was very interested in seeing these crop up all over the North Country some years back. And then I was lucky enough to take a trip to visit our son and his wife in Portland, Oregon. And that's a beer drinker's dream.
Washington and Oregon are probably the leaders in the whole brewery movement in the country. Maybe partially because of their historical connection with the hop growing out in the Midwest and in the state of Washington. Yakima Valley is famous for the hops it produces. So that part of history has always remained in those communities, those states, and they jumped right on that bandwagon.
We're talking about how things expanded here. You start with a germ of an idea to build something called a Comfort Inn. That name hasn't changed, has it, from the beginning?
No, we researched all the major franchises at the time and picked Comfort Inn, and it's worked for us, and we intend to stick with it.
I guess some of our viewers may not be aware that it is a sizable national chain, right?
Very sizable. I'm not sure of the recent numbers, but I think there's a couple thousand Comfort Inns.
Isn't that amazing?
It is amazing. They've experienced incredible growth in the 80s and 90s. They're all over the country and starting to expand in foreign markets now.
And although those hotels that we talked about at the outset of our program are mostly all gone, a few have been renovated across the country, and a few still exist here in the North Country. It's this kind of facility that really has taken its place, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's the same for the hotel industry as it is for the restaurant industry. People look for consistency, brand recognition. They expect to know what they're going to receive when they arrive at a certain place, and that's the way a lot of business has gone in this country.
Now, it was a while before you added the sports angle of it, right? With all the machines and the pool and
the Court Club was part of the original concept, and
it was.
Yeah, the Court Club was there when we opened in 1988. It's undergone 3 expansions.
Oh, that's what I'm thinking of. Okay.
Yeah, but it was there. It was there with 3 racquetball courts, a handful of cardiovascular equipment, and some Nautilus machines. That's expanded now to greatly increase the cardiovascular equipment because of its popularity. We've added Nautilus, Cybex, and cherry-picked some of the other lines. So we really have a full line of free weights and pin-loaded and plate-loaded equipment.
That has to change because you have to keep up with the Joneses, don't you?
Yeah, that industry's undergone a lot of changes. When we opened, we had 1 treadmill, and that was sufficient. Now we have 7, and sometimes it's hard to get on one.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, it's just changed.
But there is competition. We don't have any huge convention centers per se here. Do you think we ever will? You have conventions here at Comfort Inn, but I'm talking the 600 to 700 people accommodated at one place. We haven't arrived at that here in Plattsburgh yet, have we?
I don't think we've arrived there. I think there's a lot of competition out there with Lake Placid, a lot of other areas throughout the state, the Finger Lakes area. It'd be interesting to see a feasibility study on that. I think sometimes we expect too much of our community, and I really don't think we're ready for that.
Well, when they built Pyramid Mall, I was never a naysayer, but I stood back and said, I wonder, can we really fill that parking lot? And that was the days when the Canadian dollar was at par or better. And now look how things are changing. Yeah, you better do feasibility studies when you're going to build a place like that.
Yeah, and it's not something you can use once a month or twice a month. There has to be, continuous, extensive use to justify that kind of investment. That's not a gamble I'd be willing to take.
No, not at this stage in your life anyway. No. Can we take a walk around and have a look at the brewery over here? This is what the pub looks like in the earlier afternoon times. I'm sure it'll be hopping before this day is finished. This is kind of neat. Stainless steel at its very best. Copper.
Yeah, copper and stainless steel. If you look to my right, these are the brewing vessels. The grain is actually cooked in this vessel and brought up to temperature, and water is leached through the grain to draw off the nutrients. Then it's pumped over to this vessel, and it's boiled, and hops are added. And then it's run through a centrifuge type thing to take any impurities out and pumped into this fermenter. As the fermenter starts to fill, we open up this front door and add the yeast, about 5 gallons of yeast, seal the door, and let her go. And probably ferments for 4 days. And then there's some temperature adjustments for another 3 days. And at that point, the beer's ready. All naturally carbonated. As the yeast eat the sugar in the wort, they give off CO2 as a byproduct. You can see on the gauge down here, there's 10 pounds of pressure in that tank. That's all created as a byproduct from the yeast in the solution eating the sugar. They eat sugar, turn it into alcohol, and give off CO2 as a byproduct.
And the process only takes about a week, did you say?
About a week.
Isn't that amazing? So how often are you constantly making one batch when the other one is ready?
On our most popular beers, we try to have a backup. We probably brew an average of probably twice a week. So we need backups on our most popular beers.
You make more than one kind?
We've probably made a total of 13 or 14 different
Have you
beers.
really?
We regularly stock, I think right now we have 7 on stock, ranging from a real light blonde that's very much like a mainstream beer to a stout, which is much more hearty, flavorful type beer.
Now, did you have to learn this whole business yourself, or did you hire a brewmaster?
I was it. We knew we wanted somebody with some longevity. I went to Chicago to brew school, and
Oh, you had to go to brew school.
right, Siebel Institute.
What a great
Chicago.
place to go to school. How come we didn't go? I guess we did go there and nobody knew it, right?
Right. So I got the training there. Then I went down to Louisville, Kentucky, and I brewed with Bluegrass Brewing, and came up here and started brewing our own batches. Pretty easy process with this type of equipment. It's more mechanical than anything else. The recipe development is a lot more theoretical and exacting, as far as hop additions and yeast choices and what mixtures of grains to use. But the actual brewing process is very simple.
You like to think that some of your beers are unique?
I think they are. We tried not to get real outlandish with any of the beers. I have my own preferences, and I don't care for beers that are too far from the mainstream, although I like them to taste a little bit different. So we went that route. We don't add an overabundance of hops. Don't use any real unusual grains or additives. But we have what we think is a product that gives people an alternative to mainstream beer.
Did you name every one of the 13?
Well, that was a joint effort. We did that with Terry and I and our employees contributing a
Imagine
lot.
what that was like.
That was a lot of fun.
Let's try another one. What are we going to call this one? And some of the names have stuck. Have you changed the names on some of them?
I don't think we've changed the names on any of them. A lot of them are regional type names. Our porter, for instance, is called Prohibition Porter.
Of course.
Our blueberry is Adirondack Blueberry. Our red ale is Cardinal Red, named after the Plattsburgh State Cardinals.
My favorite, by the way.
And our pale ale is Canada Goose Pale Ale. I don't know how we came up with
Calvin and
that.
I are drooling here. We never should have come in this room.
Well, you'll have to stay after the show.
Do you export any of it, or do you mostly sell what you make right here? And that's it, or what?
Everything's sold in-house.
In-house.
Yep.
Never thought about cranking it up 4 times a week instead of twice a week?
Thought about it. We don't have the refrigeration
I see.
space.
That's true, too.
We certainly don't have a bottling line, which takes up a great amount of space. We're content with what we have right now.
So you don't bottle any of it?
We don't bottle any.
Okay. So it's taken right out of wherever it's stored.
Well, it finishes fermenting in here, and it's piped through stainless steel pipes to there's a cooler up by those cars. You can see the tanks up there.
Oh, to the right of the car. Yeah.
Right, and those are the serving tanks. The beer drops right down from there into the taps on the bar. Refrigerated lines right up to the taps.
That ought to be a challenge to put it all together in the very beginning.
Yeah, it was, and just if you figure those, I think there's 7 tanks up there. If they're all full of beer, there's an awful weight load. So.
Oh, I never thought about how much they weigh.
Yeah,
Have to get our friends up here and help them with that problem.
yeah, there's a lot of steel holding that up.
Yeah, I bet you there is.
For sure.
So the brewery's actually been here since what year?
We opened in December of '95.
So almost 7 years already,
Right.
and still going strong. I like it in this room. I hate to leave, but there's so much to see and do. Let's look around, all right?
Okay.
Then directly across from the brewery is the restaurant. But before you look down into the restaurant, look at this mural. Tell me about its history, Jim.
During the decorations, someone mentioned that wall really could use a mural, and we talked to Alex Radd about it. He'd mentioned that he hadn't painted anything since he was 16 or 17 years old, but he'd give it a try. So 30 years after having been away from it, he developed this. A lot of the characters are very recognizable, the Carrie Nations, and I think Babe Ruth's in there, Elliot Ness.
Yep.
Alex is an extremely talented person who, to think that he did this after being away from a paintbrush for 30 years really surprised all of us. We didn't expect anything nearly that good.
You said Rudy Valley, didn't you? I heard you say Rudy Valley with a megaphone and several others that I can recognize from that era. That's a beautiful piece. So that's been up there a while, hasn't it?
Yeah, he just did that in '95. It's also a tribute to the era itself. If you notice, the jazz was a big part of the 20s, and he incorporated that. He incorporated the biplane and
the slot machine and Betty Boop over in the corner and
Yep.
all the 23 Skidoo stuff, yeah?
And even the cars,
And even the cars. That's really, really nice.
Yeah.
All around inside this building are different kinds of memorabilia. I was looking to the right-hand side before at the photographs. Now that must have been quite a challenge to collect the newspapers, the photographs, and on the entrance walls coming up here, old-time sheet music. Just amazing.
Yeah, that was Alex's credit again, and got those mostly in the New York City area. Came up with boxes of old newspapers. We clipped front pages off and framed them and put them on the wall. There's an interesting letter here from Clyde Barrow to Henry Ford on how good his car was because he could outrun the police.
He had a 34 Ford four-door, which is, I had one of those for many years. There's mug shots up here and fingerprints and old fire trucks and just neat stuff. And he's the one that collected all this stuff for you, or what?
Alex probably collected 95% of everything that's in here, if not more. The guy brought back some incredible stuff. It was like Christmas Day when we'd see him pull into the parking lot because we couldn't wait to open up his van to see what he had found.
I wonder how we got to Connections to get all this neat stuff. You got movie posters that now are starting to be worth really big bucks, and I've seen a few on your wall.
Alex has always been an antique book dealer and collector, so he ran in those circles and knew where to go, knew where the proper places to look, I guess, and he didn't seem to have any trouble finding what he was looking for.
Calvin, look up here. Do as your dentist does. Use powder. Dr. Lyon's tooth powder outlasts toothpaste 2-to-1. Personal memories for me with Dr. Lyon's tooth powder from my childhood. The grossest stuff you could ever put on a toothbrush. I think my mother was a sadist, but I would never tell her that. It's a good thing she's gone. To the right-hand side here, you can see the Normandy, a poster for the Normandy, one of the great luxury ships of its time that were turned into a troop ship. And through some sheer ignorance and negligence, it burned and caught on fire and began to list. And as I've told many of our viewers and thousands of my radio listeners many years ago, my father had a wonderful and amazing sense of history, and that's something we've talked about a lot since we started our program today. And the minute Gabriel Heater or somebody came on the radio and said the Normandy was on fire, he says, "Kids, get in the car." And we lived in Westchester County in those days, and he took us right to the site of the burning Normandy.
Oh, wow.
And told us about the history of the boat and what a tragedy it was that it was burning and listing. And it wasn't very many hours before they put up giant wooden fences so the public couldn't view it, because it was a tremendous snafu. It never should have burned. But those moments and many others, like the plane flying into the Empire State Building back in the 1940s, almost a prophecy of 9/11, although that wasn't a terrorist attack. Those things you don't forget when your father takes you to see real history, you know?
Yeah, seeing history in the making is really something, and usually when you're at that moment, you kind of have a sense of what you're seeing also.
Yeah, we try to engender that in our viewers. I think it's very important for youngsters to understand that they fit in. A lot of us live a whole lifetime and don't know where we fit in, but it's nice to see yourself as part of the whole, isn't it?
Yeah, we're all part of the whole. We all contribute a little bit to our era, I guess.
Well, your family certainly has to the history of Plattsburgh, and that's what we're talking about today, right?
Yeah, I guess so. Historically, going back 40 years with my family, my brother, I guess he was on radio with you in the 50s.
He certainly was.
A long time ago.
If he were here, he'd be giggling today because it was so much fun to break him up when he was on the radio that summer. He went down to Florida and became a big-time lawyer, got religion, came back home, and now he is certainly a pillar, a relatively small pillar of the community. But he's such a great guy and a wonderful family man and a good friend, and you are too. I know your parents would be proud of you.
No, thank you.
That little grocery store, is the building still there?
No, the building burned down in the 80s.
Oh, it did? Okay.
Yep.
Yep, didn't remember
so
when it burned. What a tragedy. That was a grocery store for a long time.
For a real long time. I think it was an electrical store before my grandmother bought it, and I believe that was in the late 30s. And the grocery business was started then, and my father and mother ran that till about 1970. My father had recently passed away. My mother sold the business, but it continued as a neighborhood grocery store until the fire in probably 82 or 83.
You must have pictures of it somewhere.
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah.
That's great. Someday, that may be a whole nother show.
It could be.
The history of the little North Country grocery stores, and we all remember so many of them. All right. Now, the restaurant, how many people does this hold? I see you've maintained that checker motif in here.
Yeah, I believe there's 90 seats in there. Pretty quiet right now being mid-afternoon, but 90 seats.
I see the old cash register over there. Does the bell still ring when you open the drawer?
The bell still rings. It actually works. But everything we have nowadays, though, is computer controlled for inventory control, and it's just the new equipment has so many more functions than the old equipment does.
I see a street sign that says Gregory Terrace. I don't ever remember a Gregory Terrace around here, so that...
I think that came from New York City as well.
I've got some of the old Plattsburgh street signs. As they replaced them every once in a while, I'd go and get one. Because River Street is no more. It's now Durkee Street, and times change.
Sure have, with especially with the 911. There have been a lot of renamings of roads and streets.
Yeah, times certainly do have changed, but it looks like this restaurant is going to be around for a while. I hope so, for your sake, right?
Well, we hope so.
All right. Hey, besides what's inside, there's a lot going on outside, and we're going to take a look at the whole spectacle before we're through today. Stay with us. Jim mentioned Battle of Plattsburgh, and immediately Calvin and I started twitching around the camera fingers saying, yeah, Battle of Plattsburgh. Everything you do around here seems to focus on local history, and that's great. Where did these prints come from?
We got these prints from Bruce Carlin. I believe he has the rights to them. He managed to get them reproduced. We're going to be adding them to our hotel rooms, and some of them will be in some of our public areas. We're great believers in promoting the history of the region. We do it in the restaurant. We do it out in the golf course. We want to do it in our hotel rooms, too. We really believe that people visiting this area would enjoy partaking in its rich history, and we certainly have a lot of it.
We have so many pieces of history, significant pieces of national and international history that have occurred within, let's say, 75 miles of where we're standing right now, including a lot of it within a few hundred yards. And little by little, we're plowing up that old history and chewing it up and reinterpreting many things and making it palatable for not only senior citizens but young kids. And I think it's good for everybody to focus on history. Calvin and I have talked about it literally hundreds of times on this program and privately as we ride from place to place in the car. I could never understand when I first came here why there was such a lack of interest in local history. But now we're getting there.
Yeah, we're only scratching the surface now. And Many people have known about the richness of our history before the people of this community seem to have accepted it. The gunboat Philadelphia is in the Smithsonian in Washington. You know, if that doesn't attest to the importance of the naval battles that occurred right in our doorstep here in Lake Champlain, then nothing does. It's well preserved. It's got a prominent display in the nation's leading museum.
Yeah, and every now and again, some people will bring out more artifacts. You and I have both dived in this wonderful lake. There's a systematic diving expedition that's ongoing now with friends of ours. We did a wonderful television show just a very short time after 9/11 last year with our good friend Trooper Eddie Scullin. And they're doing grid work around the site of the Battle of Valcour off Valcour Island, which is another significant piece of history from an earlier era, and they're bringing up some really neat stuff. Not only are they bringing it up, but they're investigating it. Who did this belong to? And they have ways.
We all have our opinions. I personally believe that those things currently belong to the people in the state of New York. They're in New York waters. Too many of the artifacts from the Battle of Plattsburgh and the Battle of Valcour have ended up in the Maritime Museum in Vermont. I'd like to see them returned here where they belong.
You know, my history of finding things in the lake goes, I'm sure, way before yours. And somewhere there is an extant tape recording that I did on one of Frank Papp's old scows, as we're out there with the two boys from Cliff Haven found the cannon.
I remember that.
In very shallow water, and that remained a controversy for decades and is still, in some measure, a controversy even today as to who belongs to those cannon, where should they be, and at least we've had them on public display for a time. And I'm so glad to see that anchor on display here, and I hope that Semlem and Chris Ortloff's dream of this huge interpretive center comes to be, and I'm willing to give it a lot of lip service, and I know many local people would like to see the military history of the area spotlighted down in that area of the old base. Wouldn't that be neat?
Yeah, I think it'd be real nice. I think you'd see as things come closer to fruition, I think you'll see a great outpouring of support. There's in talking to people, you can sense that the urgency they have in preserving our history and in developing that type of museum on this side of the lake.
It takes a while to get some North Country people off their duffs. They may be excited, but they don't just jump up and cheer until you prod them a little bit. But I think we're at that point now where the prodding has taken place and people are seeing that we got a real bandwagon rolling.
Yeah.
I like to see that.
I agree with you, Gordy, and I really hope it happens.
Yeah. I love these pictures. Obviously, you're going to find frames for them and a good place for each one.
We sure are. We have 280 of them. The vast majority will be in the hotel rooms and scattered in some other spots throughout the property.
Yeah, you mentioned Bruce Carlin and Media Central. He and his friends and Colonel Fitzins and others traveled to several countries of the world, including Portugal and Spain and Canada and elsewhere, to try to find these prints, to bring them back, to do a video which they hoped would be eminently successful and make them all multimillionaires so they wouldn't have to slave like the rest of us do for a living. Well, sometimes the best laid plans. So they were given some promises from some major companies in New York City that were kind of empty promises, and it's too bad. Although they're still selling copies of the video now, it's not the tremendous national and international success they hoped it would be. But it was certainly a learning process for Bruce Carlin and his friends, and we give them lots and lots of credit for promoting local history. And their website, for example, Bruce works with the city of Plattsburgh now in promoting a lot of things, and they have their daily little historical vignettes every single day on their website, and they work very hard to keep this history going. So I'll give anybody credit who's willing to promote our North Country.
Oh, I think so. deserves a whole bunch of credit. We spent a lot of time on the internet researching this very project, trying to find the proper prints for our hotel rooms. If it wasn't for Bruce's prints, we'd have been unsuccessful. There really isn't much out there. He's the best prints that exists of those battles. He's the guy who's got them. He's got them.
That's not a bad position to be in, and thanks to Bruce for all of his hard work. All right, what can you show us next in this wonderful place?
I can show you a golf course with a little historical bent.
Yeah, we'd like to see that, so let's do that in just a moment. In June of 2002 is when we're making this tape recording for our little corner, and you're getting kind of a panoramic view of a mall complex that hasn't been here all that many years, and even that is changing. There is a FLW fishing tournament going on, covered by ESPN. A huge tent was built and that was not just a bunch of guys and bringing in a pet elephant to pull up some stakes. That was amazing. It has a metal frame. FLW people connected with Sam's Club and Walmart, and some of the most incredible fishing boats I have ever seen in my life. Did you see some of those, Jim?
Sure did. A lot of them staying here at the hotel, and the other hotels all have their share of boats too. They're bringing a lot of business to this community.
Yep, and it's a week-long affair that I think culminates on Sunday, June 23rd.
Yeah, it does end on June 23rd. Some of the fishermen were here as early as about the 10th of June to start practicing and learning the lake a little bit. It's a national tournament. This is one stop. 250 professional fishermen qualified for this event. And for the first time ever in this FLW history, all 250 signed up to fish this Lake Champlain tournament. They view this as untapped waters, and they want to be up here.
Well, and the local fishermen all have their own comments when the boats go by for one reason or another, and it brings up the issue of the lamprey eels once again, and they're still finding lots of them in spite of all of our best efforts to get rid of them. Once we did, we'd have one of the best fisheries in the world here.
Well, we just about did, and our efforts ceased for a while, and we got caught with our guard down. Hopefully something will start going again, and we'll get that problem taken care of.
Now, this whole area, by the way, is called Consumer Square. I don't know who came up with that idea, but somebody did.
It's Benderson Development Corporation that owns the square. I'm sure they named it. Pretty unique concept with the enclosed malls in Plattsburgh, and this is an exterior corridor mall, actually with some different buildings that are separated. But the anchors are Walmart and Sam's Club, and they sure can draw a lot of traffic.
They certainly do, and a lot of interesting comments and controversy when they move into an area because they are what they are. And so here we are now in 2002. Many of the stores in this complex have changed since it opened, haven't they?
They sure have. Grand Union used to be occupy a large section down here on the right.
The right.
That's gone. Michael's, the current Michael's what was it previously called? I got a short memory.
Don't ever nail me. I know exactly what it was because I went in there many times. What was it called?
MJ's or something like that.
Oh, yeah, something like
Design.
MJ Designs. Very good, Calvin. Pull our chestnuts out of the water. But anyway, this is a good corner to be on, and all of a sudden, or maybe not all of a sudden, you decided, well, maybe we could have a little miniature golf course.
You know, we did, Gordy, and part of it was out of the belief that we don't have an awful lot in our community for people to do. We wanted to offer a recreation aspect. This is one of them. We combine the miniature golf with the batting cages and bumper boats. And indoors we have the arcade and laser tag. And we do a lot of birthday parties. Just trying to develop a business that would service the community and provide a need, and also be here to service our hotel guests as well.
And in case people don't know, and I've written several columns about stone walls, it's not an easy job to build stuff out of stone, as you may have learned.
No, this is all original stone, came from Champlain, New York. There was a washout up there when we had some heavy rains, and gee, I lose track of the years, 97 maybe. A person up there got permission from DEC to go in and remove these stone from the river where they had clogged it up near his house. We purchased them and stockpiled them, and employed an old mason from the old world who's done this all his life, and he spent about 2 years of good weather, summers, putting this all together.
You know, in talking to a number of the European refugee families that came over here after being displaced from Europe following World War II, we learned that a couple of those people who had different kinds of jobs in Europe became stonemasons when they came here to the United States, and some of those guys became legendary, so it's interesting.
Yeah, you know, we're blessed in this country with a plethora of lumber and building supplies. This was their building product of choice over there. Masons in Europe are as common as carpenters in the United States, so if you think of their building styles, it's really not that unusual.
And your tower here, which is reminiscent of Bolt Castle, where Calvin and I have done at least one television show and I have visited hundreds of times, is now become a veritable landmark. And before the copper roof was finished, every time when we'd come in here, I'd say to Kay, I wonder when they're going to finish the roof on that thing.
The castle is designed after Fort St. Frederick and Crown Point. It's a star castle that dates back to, the late 1700s. We had pictures and some drawings of it. It fit our scheme. We were able to scale it down, and we used that as a model to construct the castle.
We have a relatively short season for miniature golf. I'm sure you wish it were at least 2 weeks longer, maybe a month longer.
I'd like to see it a little longer, and like to see the Canadian dollar get a little closer to par too.
I don't know if either one of those things will happen in our lifetimes.
Yeah, we know it will, or maybe not in our lifetime, but we know it's going to happen. I recall a day when the Canadian dollar was worth 10 cents more than the U.S. dollar.
Oh yes, me too.
The pendulum has really swung, but we'll see what the future brings.
Yeah. So you do your best with a place like this. We were talking with friends of ours who have an almost indoor-outdoor restaurant down in the Lake George area, which they've done a beautiful job at expanding. And once again, they wish that the season were just a little bit longer and we could get about 200 days just about like this with a little light rain at night.
Yeah, I think they depend a little more on the tourists than we do. We have a local population we can draw on, but a little longer season, that'd be fine too.
Well, how did you go about designing the golf course itself?
We hired a gentleman out of Michigan who does this for a living. He came here, spent 3-4 days right on this site, and designed all the holes. Many have modeled after holes he has designed in Florida and southern United States.
It's kind of neat and picturesque, and I've never actually looked at it from this perspective before. Now I can see why it's so attractive. You had to put lights up for night because people like to play at night.
Yeah, most of our businesses on weekends or weekday evenings, so it has to be pretty well lit in the evening. A lot of drainage put in because of the contours. Each hole, where the hole itself, where the ball goes in the hole, is a drain that leads out to the pond.
Oh, I see. Okay, I gotcha. Any creatures in the pond? I don't see anything popping up down there.
Well, there's fish in there. God knows how they got there. There's goldfish and shiners, a lot of big goldfish. There were ducks nesting in here in this spring as well.
Goldfish, and you don't know how they got in there?
No idea how they got in there. I'd like to take credit for it, but I can't.
Isn't that truly amazing? And you got the bumper boats over there, and you got batting cages.
Yeah, we ran out of, with all that we wanted to do, we didn't have enough land, so we elevated the batting cages over the bumper boat pond. And that way we really have a double-decker there, and we could get two entertainment aspects in the area that only one would take.
And then to the right behind the bushes is your facsimile of a vehicle from the old Plattsburgh traction company. Huh?
Correct. We got a lot of photographs and tried to design it after the Plattsburgh Traction Company in the 20s and 30s.
Every once in a while you'll find somebody that finds an old caboose and they drag it there and it sits there for 10 years and they turn it into a diner or do something else with it.
We were one of those people. We were originally going to go with a caboose, and just the amount of work that would have been involved, it was easier to build this from scratch. We tried to sell the caboose unsuccessfully, and we ended up scrapping it for metal.
Now let's talk a little bit about national and international advertising. When you build a place like this, you can't rely totally on local customers, especially in your facility, Comfort Inn. So you got to do some national advertising too, don't you?
Most of our national advertising is done through the internet. We used to do a little international advertising. We don't anymore because the Canadians just don't seem to be coming, period. So we're not going to try to capture customers that aren't coming anyways. A lot of our advertising is in-house that appeals to our guests, and the rest of it is in the local community through local media services.
But the fact that you're attached to a national chain doesn't hurt.
No, and they charge us an advertising fee, and they take care of that generic national advertising.
Everybody wants a piece of it, Jim.
They sure do. But they do a lot for us, and I don't say that begrudgingly. They deserve to get paid for what they do. They perform a valuable service.
I can remember 30 years ago, maybe even 40 years ago, looking out when the Northway was first finished and watching people drive right on by and feeling personally hurt by the fact that they didn't stop here and spend money. I was in the media, and media survives via advertising, at least my kind of media did in those days, and wondering what can we do to get them to pull off of one of these Plattsburgh area exits. We're still trying to make them do that, aren't we?
Yeah, I think we're still struggling with that. It looks now that we're going to go after some waterfront development and some historical things with the possible museum on the base. And those are, real positive moves that the community's making right now.
We have a fabulous lake. It was called briefly a Great Lake, and I still do. And we have one of the finest freshwater beaches in the world here on Lake Champlain. And when Mother Nature is good to us and doesn't raise the level to 102 feet or drop it to 89, we can really have banner years here. And Calvin and I remember when the Canadian visitors did come, and you talked about the traffic on Route 3 today. Remember what the traffic was like on Route 9?
I do.
Trying to get out to Cumberland Head to get to the ferry?
Or trying to get from the beach home.
Yeah, that too.
At 5 o'clock in the evening. The traffic was lined up from Cumberland Head Corners to Georgia Pacific. Remember those days very well.
We've tried to recover those days with both the municipal beach and the state beach, but we've had some mighty lean years.
Yeah, we have. It started in 1992 when the Canadian dollar really started to go downhill, and it really hasn't recuperated since. There's a psychological point where the faucet gets cut off, and that Canadian traveler says, no, I'm not going to cross that border. My money is better spent up here. There's still some travel in the retail business, but the Canadians are coming down on day trips. They're not staying overnight. There's very little use of the hotels compared to what it once was.
And I wonder what an impact it'll have, now that we're commenting on what the future might be. I wonder what an impact it'll have if and when we get that airport moved out there. Have you thought about it?
I've thought about it. I think the jury's still out on that one. I really think we'd be foolish not to do what we're doing right now and moving the airport out there. We've got to be progressive in our thoughts, and that's certainly a very progressive mood. I think it's a question of how quickly we'll see the results of that, not whether or not we will see the results. It's going to have very positive results on this community. The sooner the better, and time will answer that question.
Well, we got to lay the groundwork now. Like we said before, it's fine to dream, and we're all dreamers to some extent, but to execute those dreams, to get the shakers and movers going, and We've had a lot of good support in Washington, D.C., both when we were trying to save the base and now when we're trying to promote its development after. And hopefully, we'll all three of us live good long lives so we can see these things happen in our area.
We're seeing them now, I think, and hats off to a few of the movers in our community. Dan Stewart for his waterfront development, Dan Weinecke and the people at Park for what they're doing out there, and Gary Douglas at the Chamber, a real hardworking guy who's done a lot for the whole community in so many ways.
He wears a lot of hats, and believe me, he's always got his little portable soapbox with him. Calvin and I have standing jokes, inside jokes about Gary Douglas, because it doesn't matter where he is or what he's doing. When the camera starts, he's got a few thousand well-chosen words, and they're all promoting Plattsburgh and Clinton County.
Gary's our biggest salesman.
Yeah, and he's a very, very good one. We're one of the most successful chambers in New York State, if not the nation, in what we do for our scale.
That's correct.
So what else? Do you have any dreams for the future here? You said you've got the land all packed in.
Yeah.
You already built 2 stories for your batting cage here. I mean,
I think at the present time we're in a remodeling phase. The property's now almost 14 years old. We've gone through the rooms, replaced the carpet, the wallpaper, the furniture. We're concentrating on upgrading what we have right now. Sure, there's a lot of ideas as to things that could happen in the future. The castle itself remains unoccupied, and there's any number of possibilities that we could do with that. And
open the doors, the pigeons will occupy it real fast.
We've seen that.
You have already.
Oh yeah.
Like McDonough
For
Monument, for most of its existence, was so full of the pigeon excrement that I didn't think we'd ever get it open. But they'd love to get inside.
Yeah, we had to seal everything up. They were a real nuisance.
So what do you think you might do in there?
Gee, I don't know, Gordy. There's some possibilities. People have mentioned that a water slide would look good on top of that, emptying into this pond, which, then we'd have to chlorinate the pond and make it swimming pool type water. We had thought of putting a hotel room in there, and we were going ahead with that full steam.
Were you really?
Yeah, got the town of Plattsburgh.
The bridal suite?
It was going to be a bridal suite.
How did I guess? Is that cool?
Planning board didn't seem to like the idea too much, and
You've got to be kidding.
Yeah, we dropped it. We like a hot potato, and we'll look for other things. And
sometimes the hassles aren't worth it after a while.
That's correct.
You can only fight so many battles. I have no idea what that might be about, and I don't want to discredit anybody in the wonderful job that they might do, but it seemed like a nice place for a bridal suite to me.
We had a nice design. It would have
really?
been unique. People thought we were crazy when we did what we did with the hotel health club combination, and said, that's not going to work. And we said, we think it will. We did it, and it worked. We wanted to do that concept with it would have been a 2-story bridal suite, but we were unable to do it.
Well, at least it's pretty well finished now on the outside, right?
Yes, it is.
And it looks good, and the copper's aging very nicely, like you and I are. And it's, like I said, it's a landmark. Even though it's not that tall, you can see it from a long ways away.
Yeah, we wanted to have something that would draw a little attention to what we have here.
Well, you're working at it. You and your partner are both working at it. We're going to go toward the front of your facility and wrap it up. We've seen Terry Miron a couple of times today, but he's very busy doing the things that help to make money for the organization. And who knows what the future might hold here. But I want to give you personal credit for all of your hard work. I talk an awful lot myself every time I speak on camera and to other people how important it is for North Country people to help out each other, to give back to a community that's been so good to us for all of your life and all of my adult life. It's not a bad idea to stick around your hometown, isn't it?
We're really fortunate to live where we do. It's a beautiful place. We're in striking distance of Montreal, Lake Placid, the Green Mountains in Burlington. Albany's only 2.5 hours south of us. We're centrally located with a whole bunch of cultural and outdoor activities that are right at our fingertips.
I must say, and I certainly would never reveal her identity, but I talked to a woman this morning who was a New Hampshire transplant 2 years ago. And to show you what small thinking can be, that's why I won't mention her name. She said, I'm going back to New Hampshire. There's nothing around here. And so I wouldn't let her get out the door until I told her what was around here. She said, well, there's nothing for kids. I said, well, I happen to be, part of the county youth bureau here, and there's lots for kids. And I started to name a few things, and her answer to everything I mentioned was, oh, really? So here's a person who came here 2 years ago expecting to find nothing and was eminently successful. And what could I say? I walked away shaking my head because there's so much to discover, not the least of which is the natural beauty that you and I have enjoyed every opportunity we could here in the North Country. We do indeed have the best of all worlds.
I think so. We have to recognize that sometimes opportunity doesn't jump right out in front of you. You have to look for it. We have the opportunity to visit the top museums in the world in Montreal, and it's an hour away. We have a lot here. You might have to look a little bit, but it's here or nearby.
Well, let's hope that the eye of that camera that Calvin Castine is holding on his shoulder that's taking a picture of you and me will have opened those windows to some of these people who might be visiting for the very first time, and perhaps somebody sitting in a Comfort Inn motel room from out of town will be watching this very program 5 years from now, or maybe next Tuesday, and turning on channel 15 on Charter here and said, wow, this is a pretty neat place. Maud, let's tell Aunt Sarah about it in Oshkosh and come here and spend the summer next year. Not a bad idea, huh?
We sure could do more to promote our area regionally. And, the more programs like what you do to promote the area and at least get the news out there, the better for all of us.
We agree with that. I like that concept. We're going to walk out front near the sign and wrap this program up today. I lied. I always do. I said we're going to end up out front. No, it's air conditioned in the Court Club. Calvin found the cool air blowing and he said, let's follow the nose. Well, we're here in the Court Club, and Jim, this has changed a bit since the last time I was in here. As a matter of fact, this whole idea has changed here. We're looking at a room that wasn't that a handball court before?
Yeah, it was, Gordy. We had 4 handball, racquetball courts. This was our court 1. We put a floor in, did an expansion on the weight room. Upstairs and the downstairs was an expanded cardiovascular area to give us more elliptical machines, treadmills, things like that.
Now, the idea of who works out and what they want to do to get in shape has changed.
That's changed entirely. In 1988, when we opened, group classes were a big thing, aerobics classes for the women. And on the male side, it was pretty much racquetball and weight training. Now, group classes don't seem to be as important. Many more women are weight training. They recognize the value of cross-training. They're doing their cardiovascular exercising on elliptical machines and treadmills. Coming up to the weight room, many days you'll see more ladies up here than you do men. Quite a stark change from what we had in the 1988 era. Racquetball, on the other hand, seems to have really gone through a period of stagnancy and maybe even drop in participation. We used to have a nice rivalry with the Bay Club. And we'd have inter-club matches that kept that competitive spirit going, and that's kind of gone. It's very unfortunate, and there's not as many people playing racquetball as there were.
It's too bad. I like to see senior citizens, my age and older, coming in to push a little iron, because all of a sudden in the last few years we're discovering that weight training is good for you when you're 80 years old, 85 years old.
You'll see, if you were to come in here, in another hour, you'll see a lot of people who are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond, up in this weight room getting their exercise. People just know what the studies are saying, and the facts are out there. The closest thing to the fountain of youth is exercise. and diet.
It's really quite simple, but we don't always bring ourselves to do it as a religion. It has to become a religion, doesn't it?
It doesn't have to be a religion, but what you'll find is that most people develop a habit and really miss not coming.
Yeah.
You feel
It's
so
like
much
jogging,
better.
You know, when you stop, you feel
Right.
bad.
You feel so much better when you do exercise. You think it would make you tired, but it gives you energy that you miss it, and it becomes a ritual thing. And plus, you make friends and get people to work out with, and you enjoy meeting them.
That's not a bad idea either.
No, it isn't.
The social aspect of it is a good thing too. Jim, thank you so much for being a congenial host today. Our best to Terry Miron. We know he's been so busy. He's trying to start a new semi-professional baseball team in the area. I can't even imagine what time and energy that takes.
A lot of time and a lot of energy. Getting things off the ground, it's the initial season. Travel arrangements had to be made for teams to go throughout the Northeast. It's an ECAC-sponsored league, actually Major League Baseball sponsored, probably as close to a semi-pro baseball team as you'll see in Plattsburgh.
Maybe the old Plattsburgh Majors will be revisited.
Yeah, I remember them as the Falcons, don't I?
The Falcons were here, and the Majors.
Yeah.
And several other teams. American Legion baseball was really, really hot in the Harry Demery days, remember?
I remember
Back
them
in
well.
the 70s? Yeah. See, we love to reminisce. Jim, thanks so much for having us here today.
It's been a pleasure.
Best of luck. We've tapped your brain, found out what your dreams are, and we hope every single one of them comes true.
Great, I hope so too. Thank you.
And who knows where we're going to be next time for our little corner.